Wonderful. All right, well, let's begin. So I'll just share my screen. So I've got some slides here. So I thought it might be nice just to start with a quick check-in. So I'd love to hear just very briefly from everybody about, what brought you here? Why did you choose to sign up to this? So something about your situation, need, or interest that brought you here today. I think the way I'll do this, rather than just for the sake of time, maybe type it into the chat rather than doing it out loud, and I'll read out just a few of them, but it'd be nice to just get a sense of who's here. Don't worry, there will be plenty of time to ask questions and for you to input into this as well, but it'd be lovely just to hear from you briefly in the chat. So I'll copy that into the chat and stop sharing my screen for a moment. So here's the question. Oh, great. Sven's already read the book. I know some of you have. Did all of you guys either come to the previous session that I did or watch the recording? Just give us a wave if you did. So only Teresa did. Don't worry, it's totally fine. There is no punishment. So I'm going to. Don't worry, I've made the workshop so it doesn't assume that you know anything, but it will. But what we cover today will then mean even more if you do watch the recording. Irina can send you another link to that. It's on YouTube now, isn't it? And that will go a bit deeper into some of the concepts. But this will definitely serve as an introduction. But it's good to know the rest of you have got some background. So we can see, getting new ideas for planning the build-up of a company. Looking at the mapping process itself and how you can facilitate it, building on some of the ideas in my book, Work with Source. Great stuff. That sounds good to me. So let's get going. So this is what we're going to cover today. I'll briefly explain a little bit about why bother investing the time to make a map. I'll share an example with you to take a look at and make it real. And then we'll put our mapping glasses on to look at the company or non-profit or social activist movement that you're mapping, whatever it might be. And then we'll spend most of the time in the workshop actually making a map, and I'll walk you through the process. You can play along if you want to, building a map as we go. And then we'll start to wrap up talking about how to keep a map up to date once you've created it, and then have a chance to reflect at the end to think about where this leaves you and what you might do next. So hopefully that sounds something like the workshop you thought you were signing up for. If not, feel free to leave at any point, because this is what we're doing. So let's move on to talk about why to make a map. So there's four things that I would highlight, really. The first is around alignment. As initiatives grow, particularly if you're embracing more modern, more decentralized, empowered ways of working, you sometimes find that there's unnecessary duplication of effort, or things start to emerge, but in ways that aren't actually aligned to the overall purpose or vision that you're working towards. The process of mapping can help make these things really stand out and clear, so that you can then do something about it, maybe free up some resources. We've also noticed that by getting everything just really clear and transparent, you find that responsibility and accountability just goes up by a notch, which can be very helpful, because usually we think of having to introduce new processes, practices, policies to increase those things, but actually just some clarity and transparency can really help. And then building on that, the trust that you can get from transparency, not only internally inside your initiative, but also externally as well, because you can, if you use a tool like Maptio, you can publish your map to the world. So other people can get a look inside and see what this thing is about. So in the modern world, which is all about networks and ecosystems, to create that transparency can build a lot of trust. and sometimes serendipitous connections, because you might browse a map of an initiative and think, oh, hey, they're doing something that I can relate to, or maybe that I can contribute to. And then finally, yeah, for speeding up the onboarding of new people as well, which again, in more modern initiatives that perhaps embrace more decentralized ways of working, it can take people a long time to figure out how it fits together, and what everyone's doing and where they contribute. So having a map can speed up that process. So basically, you know, in summary, you just get more creative flow towards realizing your vision. It just helps things to emerge more successfully. So that's why investing a bit of time in mapping is, in my view, a worthwhile thing to do. So now let's look at an example of a map. And again, I'll share this link with you all in the chat window so you can try it interactively. So yeah, if you want to click on that link, then you'll see the same thing I'm seeing in your browser, then you can play with it yourself. But essentially, really simply, what you'll see here in any creative field map is it starts with one big circle that represents the overall purpose or vision, depending on the language you like to use, of some kind of initiative. So this is the one actually for Maptio, the company itself. So it's a nice, small, simple example. So everything that I'm doing at Maptio is around bringing clarity and flow to purposeful initiatives. So that's the outer wrapper. And then if I click on that, you can then start to see the ever more specific things that are happening in service of realizing that bigger thing. So like designing and building the Maptio product, managing finance and formal company structures, and so on and so on. And we can keep diving into the ever deeper layers. Hello to the new joiner as well, who's just come along. You're very welcome. Don't worry that you missed the very start. We're just getting going. I'm just sharing an example of a creative field map. So this is the kind of thing that we're going to learn how to make today. So at a really high level, that's it really. It shows how a big thing breaks down into ever smaller things, who's involved with what. Okay, so at this point, let me just quickly pause just in case there are any questions popping for you all. And I'd love to, yeah, encourage you to just speak up at any point. If any questions pop for you while we're talking, just go for it. Oh, and it's Tristan. Hey, Brian. Hey, Tristan. Nice to see a familiar Brighton face. Any questions popping, or shall I crack on?
Tom, just a quick one. You mentioned that one is able to browse different maps. So are they all public, or I can, as an author, can like hit the button and publish my map if I want to? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So by default, in Maptio at least, they're private. Okay. But then you can enable a public version of the map, which looks like the one that I've shared here. And in the public version, it's a simpler version. It just shows the core visualization. It doesn't have all the other app bits and pieces around it. So that's, yeah, an option for you if you ever want it. Okay, so that's an example for you. And then let me move on. Okay, so before we start to create our map, we need to start to take a particular perspective. So I call this putting on the mapping glasses, and this will be a bit familiar to you guys if you came to the first session that I did on working with source. But to quickly recap, this is the thing that's at the heart of it. So usually when you see a map like the example we just looked at, you know, we very often start thinking about organizations, like we're mapping an organization, like an organization is a thing, and we want to create a diagram that represents it. And what we want to do is to make a shift in our perspective away from thinking that the organization is a thing that therefore needs to be mapped. And instead, what we're mapping is a process. It's an ongoing process of realizing an idea in the world. So we're mapping out a creative process. So if you relate that to the example that I showed you, it's like, yes, from one perspective, Maptio is a company and we could map out the organization, but we're not doing that. We're saying really all of this is a creative process to do this thing, bring clarity and flow to purposeful initiatives. And within that, there are ever more specific creative processes going on to make the big thing happen. So that's the big perspective shift. And it has a lot of advantages, actually. You know, the two main ones are, firstly, this is the point of the exercise. So organizations don't exist for their own sake. The reason for doing it is because there's something you're trying to bring into the world or something you're trying to change into the world. So what we're doing is just very directly mapping that. The other advantage that you get is you get a much more easy to use map. So if we look at the example here, we're just using very everyday language. So even if you were completely new to this, you'd have some sense of what this thing is all about and what the more specific things that are going on inside it are. And that can help new people to learn what you're doing much more quickly. So that's the perspective that we take. So in a moment, we'll get started creating a map. And I wanted to give you one tip before we do that. And this is it. So what we're trying to do here is not be in design mode. So it's very easy to start thinking, oh, how should I structure things? Or how should I lay them out? Should that fit inside that? Or should that be called this or called that? And we're not trying to do that, actually. What we're really trying to do is just map out what's naturally emerging. So if you think of this a bit like, looking out of the window of a house and looking at the garden, we're trying to map the garden. We're trying to notice what's growing. There's a tree growing over here. There's some grass over here. There's some flowers blooming, without trying to change anything or design anything. And then as you do that process, you might spot things that do need some attention. Like, to use the garden example, you might notice that there are some flowers that are really taking over the whole garden that you might need to do something about, or maybe the tree is casting too much shade so that you need to prune it back a little bit. But what I would encourage you to do is, as you notice issues like that, is just make a note of them somewhere, either on on paper or keep a document somewhere. And then you can go back and process those issues later. So it can generate a really useful list of things that could be made clearer, things that aren't functioning so well. And then as you work through processing those items, you'll find that things flow more smoothly. So that's, one of my top tips, and there'll be more as we go. All right, is everyone ready to actually dive in and start creating a map? Let's get practical now. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you the link to Maptio. So I'll put that again in the chat for you. So so do this. Hopefully you're on sort of a laptop or desktop computer. If not, you might want to go and grab one. If you're on a mobile device, you can just watch for now and do this later. But head to maptio.com. You'll see a link to sign up if you've already got an account. I know, Irina, you've already have a Maptio account. So if you already have one, that's cool. But if not, you should just be able to follow the clicks to set up an account. It will ask you at some point to give it uses the word organization in the onboarding flow. But the only reason for that is that's just because that's the language that most people are familiar with. But really, the name that you're putting in there is the name of the creative initiative that you're mapping. Could be a company, could be something else. You'll also see there's a screen where it asks you to choose some terminology. So by default, it says lead and contributor. You can just leave that for now, or you might want to change the word lead to the word source, and that will relate to something we're doing a bit later on. But don't worry too much about any of this stuff, because what you'll see is this can all be changed later. So more than anything, just follow the clicks, and eventually you'll get to a point where you're in Maptio and it's created a circle for you and you're ready to start mapping. So let's see how you guys are getting on. Hands up if you're there and you're inside Maptio, you have some circles, just give us a wave. If anyone's stuck and needs some help, let me know. Cool, Tristan's in. I know Irina's in. Does anyone need any help? Is anyone stuck?
I just got a message that Maptio is not compatible with Safari.
Yeah, so I'd recommend using it in Firefox or Chrome.
Okay, I'll switch.
Yeah,
Even though I'm in, I mean, I see the circles.
Yeah,
So,
it does actually work pretty well in Safari.
yeah.
Actually, we've done a chunk of work to make it work in as many
Okay.
browsers as we could. Interestingly, almost no one uses Safari anymore. I think it's only about 3% of people, so it can be a lot. It can be a lot of work. I think that 3% are all on the call today. Yeah, it's a very small number of people. Most people use Chrome nowadays, so we major on making that the best experience, because that's what most people use. But it should actually, for the most part, work fine in Safari. So you can just keep going if you really don't want to switch. But if anything doesn't quite work for you, then that might be the moment to switch to Chrome.
Okay.
But for now, see how you go. And the rest of you guys, are you getting in there? Thomas is nearly there. Sven's there. You okay, Flido? Yeah. Okay. I think everyone's there or thereabouts. So maybe I'll move on for now. But if anyone does get stuck and you need any help, don't be afraid just to shout. Thomas is there as well. Awesome. Okay, cool. So that's the most techie bit that we have to do. So everyone's in. That's great. So we've done that. So the first thing that we want to do in Maptio is to name the outer circle on the map. So if I switch to my example here, so I'm now going to go into the Maptio map. So this is the same example we were looking at earlier. What you can do, a couple of things I'd suggest actually. The first thing I'd say is switch the view that you're looking at in Maptio. So on the right hand side, you'll see you've got these different views of your map. Click the one that says expanded, or it might be in German if your computer is set to German. If you prefer using web apps in English, which some people do, you can do that in the top right corner. But if you click on the expanded view, this is just a view in Maptio that will always show all of your circles open at once, which can be more useful when you're first building your map. So hopefully everyone's there, and you'll see if you've just started, it's created a few circles for you to get you going. But we're going to focus on this outer circle. So make sure you've clicked on that circle on the map. And then you've got this panel that appears in the middle of the page, which shows me the information about the circle. So what I'd encourage you to do here is to see if you can summarize in a few words what this initiative is doing. So the question to ask here is, what's the overall thing we're doing that everything should be contributing towards? And as you do that, depending what language you do this in, the grammar might be slightly different, but certainly in English, it always starts with a doing word, with a verb. So in this case, like bringing clarity and flow to purposeful initiatives. So we're looking for a statement of what we're actually doing. So try not to make it too long is another tip. Maptio will let you put in circle names that are quite long, but it's usually best to keep them shorter so the map doesn't get too clogged up with text. But see if you can come up with that short articulation. Got some other examples here if you need them on the slide. That's the one we've already looked at. It could be something like eliminating child poverty in the UK, creating a decentralized financial system, or it might be nothing so big and grandiose. It doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be honest about what this initiative is really about. So how are you guys getting on? Has anyone been able to name their outer circle? Does anyone want to just share their screen quickly? You can do that. You can do that through Zoom. That should be enabled now. See who gets there first. Who wants to do it? Julia, thank you.
Oh, but that's the wrong screen.
No, you got it. That works perfectly.
Yeah, okay.
Great. Oh, I love it. That's a really good example. Thank you for sharing that. Empowering leaders to serve the greater good. So I like it because you've got empowering, you've got the verb in there. So again, it's so powerful because every day you or anyone else can ask themselves, am I doing that thing? And I might be doing it in a very specific way by just writing somebody an email, but I know ultimately it's in service of doing the big thing. And I can see as well at the beginning there, I'm assuming that's sort of the name of the initiative, GGL.
Yeah.
And you can do that.
Oops.
You can yeah, I think that was the scroll
Yeah.
wheel went a bit crazy there. Yeah, if ever that happens, you can just click on the zoom fit button on the screen,
okay.
and it will in the towards the right, and it will just ping it back into shape. Sometimes scroll wheels on computer mouses cause that. So that's the outer edge of the circle. Has everyone been able to do that? Give us a shout if you feel like you need any help or it's not clear. Thomas is sort of on the fence a little bit. Yeah, how are you getting on?
It's difficult for me to switch back and forth and
okay.
To follow you and work at the same time. So
yeah,
I'd rather follow you than doing my own. Okay.
That's totally fine. Yeah, you do it in whatever way suits you. There's no test at the end, and you'll have these slides as well that will guide you through it if you want to play along later. All right, so we've named the outer circle on the map. And now the next thing we want to do is to start to add some people. So this is a really important moment when we can start to follow this different perspective of not trying to map an organization, but instead try to map a creative process, the creative process to realize whatever it was you just typed in to the outer circle there. And in doing that, that's where we use the perspective of source that most of you have some familiarity with from the first workshop. But very briefly, the source is the person that you can think of as the author of the vision, the overall author of that creative process that's unfolding. So the word source for this comes from my good friend and teacher, Peter Koenig, whose work, my book, Work with Sources, is based on. And what he noticed is that for any human enterprise or initiative or company, you can identify one individual who's in a slightly different, unique role of holding that vision. And that's the person that we call the source. And what you might find is that in some initiatives, that person is the same person who's kind of recognized as having some sort of organizational leadership role. It could be the CEO. It starts with the very first founder of the initiative, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's somebody different. It's not actually the person who's the CEO. But if you start to inquire into who was the person who first took the initiative, so who was the person who did the first real step to start turning some sort of idea into a creative process to realize that idea, that person is the source. It might also be that the role of being the source was passed to someone else through a succession process, like in family businesses when it gets passed down the generations. But I wonder now if you guys are able to sense into, for you, the initiative that you're mapping, who is the source? Maybe it's you, or maybe it's someone else, or maybe right now you're just not clear, and that's a useful thing to note. But whatever your answer to that, the place that you can put them on the map in the outer circle is in this box here, source. So I've already got myself in there. If I remove myself, all you need to do is click on the box, and if it's I can just type the first few letters of a name and add myself, or you can, if it's somebody new, they're not going to be in Maptio yet, so you can just type their name in that box and then make sure you save their details, and then they'll be added to the circle and they will appear on the map at the bottom of it. So you can see my little avatar there at the bottom of my map. So again, let me pause here and see how you guys are getting on, because sometimes it's not easy to take this different perspective, or sometimes you might not know who the source is. But how's this been for you guys on this call? Easy, hard? How about you, Teresa? I know this is newer to you than the others because you didn't come last time, but does this make sense?
Yeah, it does. I already had a name in mind, so that was an easy one.
Ah, that's great. Nice. Yeah. Really cool. And how about the rest of you? Is it clear who the source of the initiative is for yours? I really think it's you for yours, isn't it?
So yeah, in my case, yeah, It's visualise, yeah.
Great. So has everyone been able to play along with that, or any sort of questions, or anyone stuck? You good? Cool. So we're getting into it. We're getting into it now. You guys are doing super well. So let me go back to my slide. So we've started by adding the source person. And now what we can do is start mapping the circles inside it. So the way to think about this, the question to ask yourself is, what are the things that somebody has taken responsibility for doing that contribute to the overall thing that we're doing? I might actually write that in this slide, actually. Here we go. So ask. So what are the things people have taken ability for doing that contribute to the big thing? So that's the question that you can ask. And so again, I can show you the example on my map here. Let me just close that panel to make some more space. So here, I know that there's been some responsibility taken for designing and building the Maptio product. That's the main thing that we're actually doing, because it's a product company. And then presenting Maptio to the world is another thing that's happening. Managing finance and formal company structures and various other things. So the important thing here is those two words, the things that we're doing that someone has taken responsibility for. So both of these are really important. So again, just like the outer edge, we're looking for the use of these doing words. So you can see it's like designing something, managing something, presenting something. So it's always a thing that's actually being done, and that keeps the map active, representing this creative process, this flow that's underway. And at the same time, we're looking for responsibility. So here what this means is, if we've got one person who's the source, the natural author for the whole thing, who is the specific source for this more specific thing that's happening? So you can see on the map here, so let me show you my examples. And by the way, clicking the expand all button here in Maptio can be quite useful, and then it will open up the list of all of your circles. You'll only have a few in here if you're just getting started. But say, for example, designing and building the Maptio product, that's a thing that I've taken responsibility for doing. So again, I'm the source in there. So in that way, you can start, adding these more specific things. So you'll have a few sort of empty circles to get you going that you can start to fill in. If you need more, you just click the add subcircle button up here. So I can create as many as I like, and they will appear on the map at that same outer level. I'll delete those for now. So that's what we're looking for, is some more specific circles of things that are happening that somebody has taken responsibility for. So you can create those as subcircles on the map, and then add the people who are the source of those things. So who started that thing? So that's the next task. And again, I'll stop sharing and just unmute yourself and ask any questions.
So Tom, I have a question. Now, when I see like the big circle, the creative field, there I see myself and also other people that are working with. So even that I'm a source, there I see also others that are supporting me as the source for holding the creative field, or in general, all people that are part of the project. Because right now, 2 people are also on your screen. Like, which people do I see in the outer big circle?
Yes, thank you. That's a really good question. Let me go back to this example again. So on the outer edge of the circle, we've got myself as the source, And then what you can see further down, let's cover this now, seeing as you've asked the question. We can also, alongside the source, add other people who directly work with the source to help them hold either that whole vision or the more specific part of it. So in my case, I work really closely with Romek and with Fanny. So what you can do with those people is add them here in the who's helping box. So you can just start in the same way as you added the source, you can add other people here. But what I would say here is only add the people who very directly work with the source to help them hold that vision. Because if you ask who's helping with that, the answer to that question might be, well, it's everybody, because that is true at one level, but it's who does the source directly seek advice from, or who directly works with them to help get things clear. So those are the people that I would normally add at that level. And then inside that outer circle, you're then adding subcircles where somebody has taken responsibility for actually realizing one specific part of the whole. That's when you create a subcircle like these. And then again, the same process applies. You add the person who is the source of it, and then you add anybody else who's directly helping with that. Does that answer your question, Sven, or do you want to ask a follow-up question?
Yes, so right now I see they are the people that are helping, but these are not at all people that are working in the little circles that are within this this area of designing and building, but it is as like the support task force of the circle, and then inside of the circle there can even be more people.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So this is the people. So when we're thinking of the whole process of designing and building the Maptio product, who's looking at that whole thing holistically? And then within that, we might have, several more specific circles in that. And you could have, tens or even hundreds or more of people who are inside these more specific circles. But it's more just who's directly involved in holding this whole piece.
Okay, got it. So, and you as the source of the bigger circle, you can also be again source or helper of smaller parts within this thing, because you are not just being the source of it, you are actively working on a specific area within this topic.
Yes, this is exactly right. And again, thank you for raising this, because this is a really important point, because what you'll notice with a map like this, if I switch to the other view, is on the one hand, it's hierarchical. So, the big circle is the top of the hierarchy, and then that breaks down into more specific things that then break down into ever more specific things. And at each point, we're acknowledging one person who is the source for that part of the whole, and that is a hierarchy. And at the same time, it can be decentralized in that, as Sven said, people appear in multiple places. So one example here would be within developing the technology, which sits inside designing and building the product. And Romek is very clearly the source for this, and I'm just a helper. So he's the one who really knows what needs to happen with the technology. He's the author for that part of it, and I'm in there in a supporting role to help him. So you have people appearing in multiple places in the map, sometimes in a more leading or in a source role, and other times, supporting in another role. And that makes it sort of a non-hierarchical structure at the same time. You could actually visualize that as well in Maptio. If you click on the network button, you won't have much to see here if you've only just started. But Maptio will let you visualize these many-to-many connections between people. So in this view of the map, it will show you connections between people if they appear in one or more circles together. And the direction of the arrow goes towards the person who's the source for that circle. But you see sometimes things go in multiple directions, like between Romek and I. You can see that there are some things that Romek is holding that I'm supporting him on, and there are other things that go the other way. And the thickness of the line shows how many circles we're collaborating on. So yes, you can show both the sort of the hierarchical nature of things and the networked nature of things.
So what I just noticed in regard to this circle way of building things, it's a very specific, very new body sensation that I get, like a self-containing, self-fulfilling kind of thing, like a fractal, an organic fractal, that has a totally different flow of energy in my system. And then just looking at it, how it works and how it is sustaining itself in regard to just like going from A to B and getting C, you know, that's like, and then energy is lost here. It's like an energetic or energy building flow that is generated, which is pretty interesting, pretty powerful.
Yeah. Oh, well, you put that so well. Yeah, you beat me to it with the celebration emoji. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It's such a different perspective to take, isn't it, to thinking about organizations. And it does sometimes take us a while because everything is about organizations in work life seemingly. But actually, when we just focus on the creativity that's trying to emerge, the creative process to realize a vision, then that can be so much more powerful. Yeah, go ahead, Tristan. I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, hey there, Tom. Been talking to someone. Yeah, just thinking that the value seems to be definitely over time, and maybe you'll cover this a bit later. Do you think there's a good practice, or you've seen that maybe I don't know, after weekly meetings or after monthly meetings, you might have had notes, and then you'd come back here and supplement into this some details or some connections? Because it feels like it would be good over time, at least in my thinking of it. You aren't going to know, you're going to get more value if you see the connections evolve over time, or you work out who needs to support what to balance the ideas and the circles.
Yeah, that's right. So what I tend to find is that there's an initial sort of burst of value when you first create the map, because suddenly you've got this new perspective and everything's much clearer, and you maybe identify some things that aren't working so well that you can then work on. But then, yeah, again, over time, because as Sven, so nicely put it, this is a much more organic, ever evolving thing. So that it will change over time. And yes, you can keep coming back to the map regularly to update it with your best current view of reality. And one of the tips I'll cover later, actually, but I can jump to that now, is that if you have a regular rhythm inside your initiative, so many people have some sort of monthly or quarterly rhythm where you're reviewing things or making plans for what happens next. Those can be really good moments to go back to the map to say, is this still the best view of what's really happening here that we've got? Has anything kind of died in the garden that we need to now remove from the map? Or is anything new growing that we haven't mapped yet? And you can get those things on there, at the same moment that you're working on various other things regularly, and then your map's up to date again. And it doesn't matter too much if it goes a little bit out of date. Any map is out of date the moment it's printed, usually, isn't it? Or Google Maps is never 100% up to date, but you at least know it was up to date, a month ago or a few months ago, and then that's usually good enough to keep moving on with. So yeah, so the practice of coming back to it is really powerful, and it should help you to stay clear up confusions, and provide that reference for new people joining as well. All right, any other questions popping for you guys? How are you getting on with adding subcircles? Does anyone want to share their screen or ask a question? I'm curious to see what you're mapping. Yeah, go ahead, Julia. Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. So yeah, I was just noticing that I'm pretty much in a startup phase yet. So there's no consideration yet about employees, but there are actually people who are helping me with things. So it's nice to consider those somehow also as part of the movement or part of the energy that wants to flow. And it really energizes me to see, wow, there is contributors, even if they're not my employees or something.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I really agree. And it's the language that I sometimes use is this concept of the creative field, which is why we call it creative field mapping. Because the idea is that if we're not focusing on the organization, we're focusing on this sort of like, almost like magnetic or gravitational field that emanates out from that first founder, which is, I'm sure, exactly what you're doing, Julia. If you've got a startup, it starts to draw people in. And so you're mapping the field. So that's why it's creative field mapping. And yeah, and it includes whoever has been drawn in. If someone is participating in that some way, it doesn't matter if they've signed an employment contract. You could certainly, if you wanted to, make that clear in Maptio, who is an employee contracted or who's just a person, a friend or an advisor who's in there. But they're all people who are in some way part of this creative process. So yeah, get them all in there. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Anyone up for sharing their screen just to show us where you've got to? If no one else does it, I'm going to pick on Irina because I know she's done some mapping and see how she's getting on. But would anyone else like to share where they've got to? You don't have to. It's fine if you want to keep it private. Well done, Sven.
Yeah, still working on it.
Yeah, no, that's great. So you've got the outer circle, experience the power of meaningful human connection. And then within that, building up a community space, building the technology. And then you've got, yeah, a blank circle that you can still fill in. Yeah, that's great. And you're starting to identify. So it sounds like for building up a community space, there's somebody else who's the source of that. So you're the source for the whole, and then there's somebody else who's the source, the specific source, as we call them, for this particular part of the whole.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a very interesting process because he's my co-founder, and just this question of who's the source of the project really brought up a lot of material that we could work through. And yeah, so it's a really inspiring thing. And even that we did not dive too deep into it, it really energized both of us just to recognize, okay, Sven is the source, Johannes is a co-founder and a specific source for several aspects. That was really a powerful shift in our working together.
Yeah, great. You're already becoming a master at this stuff. Really good. Okay, great. So I think I'll move on, but as always, just shout if there's a question popping for you. So let's see where we're at next. All right, so we started mapping inner circles. Let me share another little tip with you. What sometimes happens is because our brains often naturally just go back to organizational thinking, we start to think in terms of teams and that's very natural because very often there is a team or a group of people who are working on one of these more specific things. So it's very easy to end up with things like tech team or customer success or, you know, any other name that a team might have. And the encouragement is whenever you feel like that's what you're mapping, is just to ask yourself, what are we actually doing with that thing? So then tech team can become developing the technology, customer success can become helping customers get more value from us. So then whenever you do that, you're getting your perspective back into that mode of saying, what are we actually doing here? What's the creative process that's emerging? So that's a little tip for you. And then what you can start to do is to map even more specific circles inside these ones. So whether or not your maps need to go this deep, I don't know. So don't worry too much about that if you don't need this now. But the idea is that the same principles apply as many levels deep as you need. So you can see even in a small thing like Maptio, we've actually got things quite a few levels deep. We've got sort of the overall vision, designing and building the product, translating user needs to designs, and then carrying out user research. There's 4 levels of depth there, even just for a small thing. And so, yeah, again, if you want to do that in Maptio, the same process applies. You just click add a subcircle on whichever is the circle you want it to appear within. So if I want another one inside building the product, I can create it here, start typing something, and then that's going to appear on the map for me over here. So you can go, yeah, as deep as you like. And again, just keep following the same process. Identify who's the person who took responsibility for that thing. So who's the author of it or the source of it, depending on the language that you want to use. So yeah, so as you play around with this, go as many levels deep as you like. All right. So next up, adding roles. So what you find you might want to do sometimes is somebody might appear on the map. You might have added them to a circle that they're contributing to in some way. And you might just want to be able to specify what it is that that person is doing inside that circle. So roles are just a more specific thing that someone is doing. So just like a circle that describes what we're doing, a role is just a more specific thing that a person is doing within a circle. But sometimes you find you don't want to create a circle for every little thing that somebody is doing there. You want to keep things a bit more compact, and that's where roles fit in. So let me just sort of show you an example here. So again, looking inside designing and building the Maptio product, and I've got the people who are in that circle, and then I've added a role to Romek, just a silly one here, to say Romek's role in this is making the tea. So if you want to add something that somebody is doing, we could add a role to Clements as well. Let's add a new one. So we'll say, what's Clements doing? Let's just say he's making coffee. So I can add that role. And then what you'll see when you add a role, you can give it a description if you want. So it's really up to you how detailed you go in here. My top tip would be start off quite high level and don't go too mad adding loads and loads of detail, because it will get really boring and you might find you don't need that detail anyway. So only add more detail if it really serves a particular need, because I could add in here, you know, like putting the coffee grounds in the coffee machine and so on and so on. But I don't need to go down to that level of detail. The one thing I will just point out quickly, in Maptio, we've got two types of roles. This is very simple. Custom roles means it's a thing that just that one person in that circle is doing, and it doesn't apply to anyone else. So if Clements is the only coffee maker anywhere, I'd say that's a custom role. Sometimes you might want roles to be reusable. So maybe there are other coffee makers as well. So in that case, I can add it to the role library, and that's like a list of roles that Maptio keeps for you. And then you can add that same role without having to type it again to someone else. So I'll add that one to the role library. And then if I wanted to, I could add that same role to Dave. So let's just say Dave is making coffee. There we go. And he's got that same role now as Clements. So that's how roles work. So it's always a decision you can make. Once you've added someone to a circle, just say, shall I add like another sub-circle to represent the thing that they're doing? Or if it's something quite small, just add it as a role. But it's really up to you. You know, as I said before, they're really just ways of describing a thing that's happening, something that we're doing, ultimately in service of realizing part of the vision or the whole thing. So that's roles. Any questions about that? Are we making sense so far? Please tell me if I've not been clear. Hoping it. Yeah, go ahead, Tristan.
Tom, is there a choice that it doesn't have maybe to-do functions or items on there, or maybe we might manage those separately?
Yeah, thank you. Again, that's a super useful question to have. Yeah, so in theory, you could go as detailed as you like, and you could just start mapping out all the way down to-do list items like, email this client about this thing that needs to happen. But I would definitely recommend not doing that in Maptio. And this is for a couple of reasons. The first is that there are already plenty of really good tools for tracking the detail of projects and tasks. So we don't need yet another tool to do that. So use whatever suits you for the detail level stuff. The other reason for doing that, this is particularly in more modern, more decentralized, empowered initiatives, is that in general, it's helpful to let teams or individuals choose the tools they need to manage their own work. The more old school thing is the IT department selects one system and everyone is told you must put all of your projects and all of your tasks in this system. And if you really hate it and it slows you down and makes your life hell, tough, because that's what we use here. So that's the old school thing. And obviously people do that for a good reason, because it creates, uniformity, and it means you can just create one reporting environment for it. But it comes at a great cost, because it really gets in the way of people's creativity and productivity if you make them use shitty tools that they hate. So the more modern approach is to have a helicopter view in a tool like Maptio. And as a general rule, I say, put things into Maptio that aren't likely to change over the hours or maybe even over the course of a few days. but over the course of the weeks and months, they might evolve. So that's roughly where you're aiming for. And then anything else you can put into whatever tool suits you. And I'll show you a particular way to do that, actually. I think I've got an example here, actually. Yeah, so in the circle description area, so Trello is a tool that some of you might know, which is a really good tool that lets you just manage lists of things. Or you might have a Google Doc that's got some useful information about a circle. So this circle description area, this is firstly a useful place if you want to put a bit more information about what this circle does, stick it in the circle description. And if you want to add links out to anything else, the way you do it is using this format called Markdown, which if you're familiar with using lots of web apps, you might be familiar with this. Don't worry if this is new to you. But to create a link, all you have to do is use square brackets to put in the word that you want to appear as a link. And then in ordinary brackets, you put the URL. So these are just some made up ones. They're not going to anywhere real. So then, for example, the words Trello board will be a link to maptio.com when I save it, and it then becomes a clickable link like that. If you're anything like me, you'll forget which type of brackets that you need to use. So we've got a little help file here. So if you ever click that, it will remind you, here's how to make links. You can also do things like subheadings and bulleted lists and other formatting using Markdown. So that's the help file there for that. So that's the recommendation. Yeah, stuff that changes over the weeks and months, link out to other documents, tools, systems that you're using. And it's probably embrace would be my encouragement, different teams using things that suit them, but then you've got one helicopter view in Maptio. So thank you for asking that question. That was good to cover. Any other questions popping for you right now? Yeah, go ahead, Irina.
Tom, I'm just wondering, like, if I adapt the tool for myself, it's like the perfect match, like being a founder and having something really, emerging. But how does the process work for organizations that have been, running for a couple of years? I can imagine that somewhat it might be even much more difficult to kind of, shift into circles thinking. What are your experiences?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Yeah, so the first thing I would say is that regardless of whether anybody else wants to view things in this way, you're still going to find that underneath all of this organizational stuff, there is some kind of creative process. So there is some sort of overall vision, and there will be one person who is the source of that, and there will be people who've taken responsibility for different parts of it. So sometimes, even for the sake of your own sanity, just mapping it out so that you've at least got a map of the terrain that you're working with for your own sense making. And then you might find that slowly over time, you might not do some big reveal to say, right, everyone, this is now the map and this is what everyone must now reference and work from. They just might not be ready for that. And they might, in their initiatives, still only be able to think in organizational terms, or just say, what are the reporting lines? Who are the teams? Who are the official leads? They might find the concept of source is too much, too hard to grasp for them, and they want to just think in very concrete terms about organizational roles and leadership. And if that's the case, you can actually still map that stuff out in Maptio. And you can, over time, take them on a bit of a journey. So even if you just play it safe initially and just map who are the official leads of the different areas and who are the different teams, you can slowly start working, maybe from the outside edge, start talking to the founders to say, like, from who did this thing really come? And have the conversation with them about source and see if they're ready for that, but knowing that not everybody is. And I've long since given up trying to, debate people and tell them that this is the one true way to see reality. I just sort of offer up this perspective and work with the people who are really ready for it. And people usually get there eventually. Sometimes it takes them a few years of confusion and frustration. So it might be a bit more step by step. I'm thinking situations like yours, Julia, where you've got a startup, you've got an opportunity to build this way of thinking and right from the beginning. So when you bring new people in, you can say, right, I'm going to look at myself not just as the CEO of an organization, but I'm the source of this thing. Like it's an expression of what my soul is trying to do in the world. It's not just about my ego. It's about what I feel called to do, what's really important to me, and start to recruit people in with that mindset. And then you've got a chance to do it well from the beginning, which is a huge advantage. Then you don't have to go through a change process later. So yeah, so those are a few thoughts. But Sven, I can see you've got a thought or a question.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, I mean, like the process itself of mapping it out is very interesting. I would say like the more the people are involved that are being mapped, the better it is, because then if issues arise or people do not feel as the source, while maybe the founder says, I think you are the source, but the person says, no, I don't feel it.
Yeah.
I mean, there can be a lot of mismatch. And what I also recognize right now, because just thinking about transferring it into a project that I'm in right now, I guess like the leadership person that I'm consulting and coaching right now, I would say she does not even sense her job as her soul work. So bringing in the idea of the source and she being the source, the creative field of the department, I guess is already a little bit distorted, because she's, yeah, I don't know how much she really identifies her job and her soul right now.
Yeah, she might not, and she might not be ready for it, but she is certainly capable of it, because all people are capable of being creative, and all people are capable of saying, what's my soul asking me to do in the world? So one technique that I've used in the past is to say to people, look, let me just offer you a different perspective on what you're doing here as part of this initiative, and say, I'm not going to force you to take this, but you can plant a seed. And that's, I found it can be quite disarming for people, because you're not telling them that the way they see reality is wrong and that your way is right, which can get you into an argument that you can't resolve. But you can just say there's more than one way of looking at what you're doing. And here's another one, and here's why this might be useful. But if you don't want to do this right now, that's totally fine. But just by doing that, you will have planted a seed in their mind. And you might have to be patient. I've found sometimes even years later, someone eventually comes back and goes, now I get it. Now I can see I was the source of this thing. And that was why this thing was hard and this thing was flowing. And then they're really ready. And then they move forward. But some people are in, a particular mindset that's much more like an employee. They just see that, this is my job and I'm here to do a thing that I'm asked to do, and I get paid my salary for doing it. And so, yeah, being patient, if that's where people are, and helping them to make the best of that situation, because you can do a lot from that perspective. But just keeping the door open, that maybe one day you want to see yourself not just as an employee, but as a creative source who has a soul that wants to do something in the world. But yeah, Irina, did you want to add something there?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I can imagine this being super invigorating, right? Like to get this perspective, even if you're in an employee, contract, whatever, if somebody asks you just to, I don't know, uncover the creative flow underneath your work. So I think it's really it gives energy. It's really invigorating. So love the idea. Just wanted to emphasize what you were just saying.
Yeah, it really can be. Yeah, go ahead.
And the notion that you're saying, Irina, like discovering the energy flow or the creative flow, and not mapping what I think should be the best way of doing it, but really kind of making it visible what is already there is so much more powerful than trying to do strategy, like, okay, this person would be best at that place. And very interesting.
Nice. Thank you.
I think it so explains why very good projects that started in companies, they totally crash in the moment they get transferred to someone who's supposed to know better how to lead it.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny, isn't it? Because so often a founder gets replaced by a professional CEO. And they said, we don't want the founder syndrome of the founder not letting go and causing all these problems, but they put a CEO in and then they just get a different set of problems. The thing becomes about making the money work and about formal leadership and formal responsibility, and the creativity that was once there and the passion and the soul that was in it somehow is not there anymore. And you see this all the time with initiatives after founders leave. So yeah, so it's a way of thinking about how to stay connected to that. Thank you. All right, so I've got one more feature to show you, and then we'll sort of check in to see what we should do next. I've got a couple of ideas. So the last feature that I wanted to show you is about how you can show either relationships between some of the different circles, between the specific things that are happening, or even themes that cut across many circles. So some examples of this, I've got 3 for you here. So one thing you might want to show is what's the status of any particular circles. So if I go back to my map here, I could say for translating user needs to designs, I can create a tag. So you see the tag feature here. I can say I'm going to add a tag to say that thing is going well, and then you get a little green tag on the map to say that it's going well. Or I might say it's in trouble, it needs some help, or maybe it's on pause, something like that. So you can show visually with these colored tags some sort of attribute or something about what that part of the whole, where it's at, or what it is. So it's a super flexible feature in Maptio that you can use in any way that you like. Other things that you might want to do is if there are, say, some overarching goals that apply to the whole initiative, you can create tags for them. So say, for example, here, there was something about global expansion, and this circle had something to do with that goal. Again, I can add another colored tag to do with global expansion there in that circle. And what was the third one I was going to show you? Yeah, different categories of circles as well. So some customers, for example, will make a distinction between circles that do something that's customer facing, so interacts with the outside world, versus circles that are internal facing and are just to do with managing or supporting the initiative inside. So we could add one here to say it's part of the back office administration, and then we get another tag on the map. The funky thing you can do once you've got a few tags on the map, let me just add another one over here. So let's add the going well tag to that one as well, is you can then filter the map by tag. If you're on this expanded view that has all of the circles open, I can click on filter and say, show me all of the circles that are going well. And then it highlights these ones for me. So you can use that, especially as it starts to grow, to start to see, you know, what different patterns are in here, or what themes have we got inside this initiative. So that's another thing that you can do. So those are the main principles of creative field mapping that we've now covered. So hopefully you've got what you need now, you know, either to continue working with the map that you've got, or to create any new ones, to start building out the map with the more specific circles, naming them to show what they're doing, adding people, adding roles, adding tags. That's essentially the process. And I'm wondering, would it be useful now for those of you who are building a map if we just pause, say, for something like 5 minutes, so that you can just carry on doing a bit more mapping? Just give us a wave if that would be useful to do now. I can see Teresa's nodding her head. What about the rest of you? Would you prefer just to move on and sort of work on this later? Give me a wave if you want to just move on. Yeah, I think I'm getting more move-ons than works on it. So maybe I'll do that for now. Maybe I'll be able to wrap up a few minutes before the end of the scheduled time, and then you can keep going. I don't want to sort of make everyone wait right now. But just give us a wave if you feel like you've got what you need to keep going with a mapping process. For the most part, I'm seeing some nods. Anyone got any questions or feel like they're stuck with anything? I'm assuming you're good. Otherwise, ask. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Can you also color code the circle overall color in some way, or?
The way that what you can do in Maptio is you can change the overall circle color. So at the moment I've got this bluey one. So if I wanted, say, an orangey map, I can do that. But the circles themselves are just colored as a gradient. So it just starts from light and gets darker as you go in. And then if you want to add any colors to particular circles, you do that through the tags as we've added there. We might in the future make it possible to change the colors of the circles themselves. You have to be a bit careful with that because you can accidentally do things that people who are colorblind can't see very well. So we're still thinking about the most accessible way to do that. But yeah, go ahead, Teresa.
Can you export the whole
So
circle?
So the way that you can do this is like this. So there are two ways to share the map. So the first way, if you click on the top circle view here, and then you'll see a share button will appear. When you click that, if you haven't used this before, you'll just need to click enable. And this is the place where you can get that public facing map. So it will give you this link here, which you can copy and paste. So that one, a bit like, the example here that we looked at, gives you this link that you can just send to anybody. They don't need to log into Maptio to use it. So that's one way that you can do it. You can also embed that in other websites or other tools as well using this HTML code. So anywhere that supports HTML embedding, that code should work. And then the other thing that you can do on the settings page, if I go into this. So when we go into settings, there's a few things you can change, but in here we can see a list of all of the people that have been added to the map. And if they've got an email address added to them, if they don't have an will address, you can add it here actually, just type in their email. And then what you can do is you can invite them to Maptio. So they'll get this will email them a link to say, hey, Teresa has invited you to map with them. And then they'll be able to get access. If you give them admin access, they'll be able to edit or change anything in that Maptio account. If you give them standard access, they'll be able to view everything, but they can't change it. So those are the two ways that you can do it. Some people also just take screenshots as well. You just grab different areas of the map if you want to put it into a document or something like that. So that's that. Cool. Any other questions, comments? Or we can start moving towards drawing things to a close. Think you guys are good for now? Okay, so I'm gonna move on. So let me share my screen again. All right, so we talked about sharing the map. Yeah, and then maintaining a map. So we talked about a couple of the tips here. So let me just cover the others. So the map is only going to be useful if it's up to date. If you follow my advice to only put things on the map that change over the weeks and months, not things that change daily, it shouldn't be too difficult a process to keep it up to date. The first thing that really helped is have clear ownership of the map. And that naturally starts with whoever was the first person who set the map up, but they might well want to recruit some helpers to help them do that. In larger initiatives, if you've got various groups or teams of people working on things, you could recruit someone from each of the main teams to help you keep the map up to date. But it is good to have some central ownership or coordination. In my experience, if it's everyone's job to keep it up to date, then it will just fall between the cracks and it will become out of date. The second one we covered earlier, build it into your regular rhythm that you work to anyway. And then integrate it into other processes. So this is really useful. So if, for example, you have an onboarding checklist that you follow for anybody new who joins the initiative, just add an item on that list to give that person access to the map. You could give them a Maptio login or just the link to the public map as part of that onboarding process. And then it will help that process to run more smoothly. They'll get up to speed much more quickly. Or decision making is another example. If you have the kind of culture where people have the autonomy to make decisions, to make proposals and make things happen, then you can build Maptio or mapping in general into that process so that people can look at the map and see who might be affected by their decision, who they should consult on it. So yeah, so have a think about other processes where the map could help. And then finally, to communicate it regularly. So try and make the map visible where people are looking already. So for example, if you use a tool like Slack to communicate internally, in Slack, you have lots of communication channels, and you can set the purpose of the channel. Included in that purpose, you can have a link to your map. So maybe in your general main channel where people communicate, have a link to the map. Or if you use Notion or, you know, God forbid, SharePoint or some internal sort of intranet type of software, you can put a link to the map on there so that it's in front of people. So if you do all of those things, you'll find that you can keep the map up to date and people will reference it, and it just becomes part of how you sense make as your initiative evolves. So those are my top tips there. And then, finally, before we sort of pause for you guys to have a little reflection on where this workshop leaves you and what you might do next, is that if Maptio is useful to you, I'd love to see you continue to use it. Maptio is open source, so actually, you know, anyone who's got the technical skills and capability is able to download our code and have a go at setting up their own instance of it. Obviously, that's quite a technical challenge. We also have plans where you can subscribe and then we host and support it for you. What we've been playing with Maptio is super flexible pricing. You know, we're a very purpose-driven initiative, and we don't want money to be a barrier for anybody who's doing something worthwhile in the world to use Maptio. So you can actually have a lot of flexibility to set your own price. We even put the discount codes actually on the website itself. So we have these main price points, and you can see who they're intended for. So depending on the nature of your initiative, this might look really cheap or really expensive, and it really depends. But actually, if you pick any of these price points, it'll give you the same access to Maptio. And we even put some discount codes on the website itself. So if you want to subscribe, do that. If you still can't afford it and you need some help, oh hello, that's my daughter just came to say hi. If it's still out of reach for you, just drop us a line. We don't want Maptio to be inaccessible for anyone who can benefit from it. So feel free to drop us a line, and we'll help you out. So if you want to keep using it, please do, and we'll help. And if you can afford to pay for it, again, please do, because that helps us to eventually turn this into a sustainable business, and we can keep developing it for everyone. So that's the closest thing to a sales pitch I have to offer, but it's hopefully the most friendly way that we can do it. All right. So let me just quickly check if anyone has any burning questions there at all, which I'll cover before we start to check out.
I would like to ask, like, what is the most powerful shift you saw through using this in an organization, and what was the most problematic issue you ran into using this? Yeah, great.
So some of the really encouraging things I've seen, in fact, the first time I used this process for a client that I worked with, was noticing how responsibility and accountability just went up by a noticeable amount. The founders just said this place has become more accountable. And that was really exciting to me, because we didn't have to introduce any new accountability processes or anything like that to get that benefit. I think the difficulty can come is if you try and force people to see things in a particular way. So whenever I'm working with Source with clients, I always make it optional. And that was a mistake that I made. I think I might have mentioned this when we did the webinar with WeWrite a while back. You know, going into a team and just saying, hey, I'm the source, and that means this, and that doesn't mean that, and I'm special. That obviously can be really divisive. And I very naively made that mistake when I was very green and new to this stuff a long time ago. So introduce it gently, you know, first of all, do it for your own benefit. And then, introduce people to it as you see fit, or do it from the beginning, you know, perhaps in Julia's case, when you're a startup, and then people will know from the start, this is just the way we do things around here. It was also very encouraging. I remember one of the very first customers we had on Maptio, they were about 240 people, very decentralized way of working. And they spotted 2 teams who were working on essentially the same thing, who didn't even know about each other. And so you think of the cost of those salaries every month of a group of people, you know, you're instantly talking tens of thousands of euros per month. And just by going, oh, there's that thing, and then joining the dots, and then those 2 teams have a conversation, and maybe some of the people from one team decide to join the other, and then the other people are freed up to work on something new. That was really exciting for me as well. But more than anything, I just love it when I see that creative flow happening, where people don't spend so much time on organizational governance and creating accountabilities and, you know, and all of this. Even if it's decentralized, you can end up creating a lot of organizational overhead. And what I find is that when people work very naturally from a creative field map, if they're ready and able to do that, the need for organizational stuff and governance is greatly reduced, because everything's clear, people are working on what they're naturally responsible for, and the process just flows. So yeah, I mean, I could talk all day about these benefits, but I'll stop there. But so those are a few things for you. All right, any final burning questions before we move towards a checkout?
Maybe just one question.
Sure.
It's more related to your book, is because I would like to give that to someone who I think would greatly benefit from your ideas. Is that going to be available in German anytime soon?
I really hope it will eventually. Yeah, I do get asked this now and again. The crazy thing is it's only available in English and Japanese right now. So it came out in Japan in October. That's where there was the most energy to translate it and launch it. So there's probably more Japanese books than there are English ones right now. But I really hope to one day. Or if you know someone who wants to partner on that, then maybe we can make it happen. But thank you for asking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're nearly done for today. So let me just give you, just 30 seconds or so to just quickly reflect on what we've talked about today. So you've learned a new practice of mapping, and you've learned a new tool in Maptio, and you've taken a different perspective on things as well. So we've, really done quite a bit in this workshop. So take a moment, think, where's this leaving you, and what might be next for you personally on your journey, wherever it's taking you. Okay, I'll bring you back now. So let's move towards a checkout, and it'd be really nice to just very, very briefly, like 30 seconds each maybe. So is there something that you're taking away from today? Or is there a next step that you would like to share? Something like that, but it'd be really nice, just keep it super brief so we can make sure we finish ahead of schedule. And Irina.
Yeah, so thank you so much. So for me, first of all, it has helped me, or the process, the tool, the thinking of work with source has helped me to really connect the dots, of the creative aspects that have been emerging, but also to connect it to the right people. And my next step will be, as I mentioned in the chat, to really bring it to the people who are involved in, the different aspects and the different parts of it, and to really make it transparent and visible to others. So I love the twofoldness of, my gaining more inner clarity, but also gaining more transparency outside. And maybe just before you wrap things up completely, I would like to ask everybody, because you have been given us your most precious time now for the second time already, and I think it has been mind-blowing for many of us, and really very important guidance and inspiration. So thank you for that, Tom. Really, thank you. And you guys being here, I really want to ask you for two things. Number one, I will pass you the link to our first session on YouTube, and I really ask you to drop a heart, to drop a like, to kind of share it with somebody who's on the same way like we are, founding new purpose-driven companies. So please spread the word. And secondly, do the same with Maptio. So whenever you find somebody, maybe it's not so relevant for you right here, right now, but maybe you know somebody who should know. So please spread the word, because I really believe those are the ideas that do make an impact and do make a change, because they help bring more clarity and flow to the people. So those are my two questions to you guys, or
thank you, Irina. That's so kind of you. I really appreciate it, and it's honestly such a pleasure. I love doing stuff with the visualise community. You guys are just great. You're really fun to work with, and it's always a pleasure. So yeah, that leaves me with is to say thank you to you all. I sent you a link in the chat to the slides. Maybe we can add that link to the notes when the video is posted online. And yeah, and hopefully this will be useful to share with others. So yeah, my contact details are all on the last slide there. So feel free to drop me a line if you need anything. And yeah, I really hope to see you guys again. I'm sure we'll do something else with the visualise community at some point. But thanks again for showing up. And yeah, hope to see you all again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you, Tom.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.